I think there's a second no-brainer on this. We talked before about Isaiah Foskey being a no-brainer. I think there's a second no-brainer on this one, at least for me. And I think you and I are not necessarily in the majority when it comes to folks that cover Notre Dame in this one, and that is Houston Griffith. Now,
Yep.
I did an article on irishbreakdown.com where I predict the breakout players for 2020, and my list now is different than it was then, because at the time Houston Griffith was no longer part of the football team at Notre Dame.
He was in the portal.
He is now back. He is out of the portal. He is now officially back on the team, and that is the guy that you and I both, Vince, view as another potential breakout player for the Notre Dame defense in 2020.
Well, look, I didn't. I shouldn't say I didn't. When Coach Freeman was brought in to coach this defense, and I was curious as to, it's like with the president, right? With the first 100 days, you can kind of see like what the priorities are and things of that nature, right? With Marcus Freeman, it was, okay, I'm curious to see what his priorities are with this team. Mm-hmm. And within 24 hours, he or his people or however whatever had reached out to the Griffith family that he wanted to talk.
Yeah,
and that spoke volumes to me. And I think it backed up what you and I already thought about who Houston Griffith is as a person, as a player, how important he was to this team, and how they needed to get him back in the fold.
Right.
And I think that was one of his best recruiting jobs up to this point. And I realize it's a short tenure at this point, but the fact that he was able to do that, and that was one of the things he wanted to get done first, tells me a lot about who Marcus Freeman is and where he sees this defense going. Now, you could say, the devil's advocate could be like, well, he looked at the depth chart for safety and was like, we better get this guy back, otherwise we're screwed.
Right.
There's part of that. I
Sure.
get that. But there's also, this kid has the potential to be one heck of an athlete, one heck of a safety at Notre Dame once he gets to stay at one position and safety is his home. And so now that he'll have a second full season at that position, we saw him in the spring, right? And again, it was one practice, but he was the starter at that time. And he was flying around the field. I mean, he was playing like a guy who wasn't worried about anybody taking his spot. He had no pressure. I mean, when guys can play like that, you can just see it. It's different. They play at a different level and a different speed. And that's where I thought Houston Griffith was. And then he was fighting an uphill battle pretty much the rest of the season. Right. And then when he would get on the field, because he was no longer the starter, now he's pressing. He's trying to impress. He's trying to do all the things that are going to keep him on the field.
My snaps are limited. I got to do something to stand out.
And that's
how you make mistakes.
That's a struggle, man. So I just feel like with this year, he is the starter. I mean, barring something crazy happening, he's the starter. So that pressure should be off. Now, granted, you're trying to impress new coaches, and I get all that.
But I don't think that's something that's ever been a thing for Houston.
I don't think so either.
I don't think he's ever, like, when you say, he wasn't worried about losing his spot, you're not saying, like, he wasn't worried about competition. That's just the kind of confidence he has in himself.
Yes.
Like, just give me the chance, and I'm going to show you what I can do. I think the frustration for Houston is that he didn't feel like he was getting that opportunity. And you talked about how he looked in that one practice. Vince, you and I were, you were working somewhere else at the time, but I remember when he was a freshman, and they moved him to safety. And we're sitting there watching like, God, he looks so confident there. So confident. He's making quick reads. Like, they're running bootlegs behind him, and he's already flying downhill before the quarterback has even got out of his boot because he read the tight end perfectly and blew it up. You remember those plays?
Oh, yeah.
And so then they started jacking him around. Nickel, corner, safety, corner, safety. And he just never got comfortable.
Yes. And it was a situation where he had too much to think about, and he wasn't comfortable moving all over the place. It's similar, and I know this is your favorite guy, but it's similar to when Brian Van Gorder was the defensive coordinator, and the guys had so much to think about that they were playing slower. They weren't playing confident. So it's a bit of a simile there, right? A bit of a.
I get your point. When you're moving him around as much, he's never able to learn enough to be comfortable at one spot. I get that, and I think there was a little bit of lost confidence as a freshman because they were asking him to play in the slot. And he's just not a guy that should be flipping his hips and coverage a ton. He's a guy that is a downhill, keep things in front of you, use your instincts, and fly to the ball and pick up drags and crossers and stuff like that. That's where he is at his best.
Yep.
And so I think that this is going to give him an opportunity to be at one spot, to your point, but also in a defense that I think is going to fit his skill set very well. And let me clarify something on the portal situation. Yes, Marcus Freeman probably did look at the depth chart and said, yeah, we need to get him back. But you know what? There's 30 safeties in the transfer portal right now, at least. You know what I mean? Like the number of players in the portal right now is insane. If he didn't think Houston Griffith could play, he could have easily just said, hey, let me go find a guy that I like better.
Sure.
But I mean, within hours of him getting the job, he was, and let me say something else. There was zero interest from Houston Griffith to return to Notre Dame prior to Marcus Freeman being hired. Zero. And so to be able to flip it that quickly, I think is an impressive job by Marcus Freeman. But I also think deep down it shows that this is ultimately where Houston wanted to be. Yep. He wanted to be at Notre Dame. It was just that, he also wanted to be at a place where they were going to give him a shot. And that's the thing. And, we broke that story when we talked to Houston. I said, did he tell you that, you were going to start? He goes, no, he never told me that. I never asked that. It wasn't about being promised anything. It was all I wanted was an opportunity to show my skills. And that was the only thing I guess you could say he promised him that, but that's not really a promise. I mean,
that's good coaching.
Right. And so, I think that there's also a level of confidence from Houston that they talked a lot of football.
Yeah.
And he feels like, this is going to suit what I do really well. And he looked at a lot of film, and he backed everything that Coach Freeman told him. He went and looked at the film to see if what he was telling him was accurate, and it all checked out, and so film doesn't lie. Right.
Right.
So I think when you put him in a situation where he's going to fit a defense, he's going to fit in, I think he's not worried about not losing his job from the standpoint of he's confident in himself. If you give me the opportunity, I'm gonna make you, reward you. And we talked about this after he decided to come back, Vince. The one game where he played where he wasn't looking over his shoulder was the North Carolina game, because Kyle Hamilton got ejected.
And he wasn't coming back in. Right.
Right. And so he was rotating with DJ Brown, but I thought he played really well that game. That was his best game by far.
And that was one of the better offenses that Notre Dame that faced all season.
Yeah. In the regular season, the only other offense that was as good was Clemson's. I mean, that's it. And I'm talking second version of Clemson. Right. So anyway, I think that one is another, I'd say, no-brainer, where he's going to go from lightly used to a good, solid starter. Now, how good is he beyond that just good, quality, solid starter remains to be seen. He's got to prove that, right? He still has a lot to prove as a player, but I think at the very least, you're going to have a solid safety situation at Notre Dame next year at worst. At best, it could be outstanding.
Yes.
But again, I need to see Houston now back that up. The talent is there. The opportunity is there. Now he has to back it up if he wants to really show that he did, in fact, deserve more of a shot than he got.